We are about to hear Cormac McCarthy talk about the Austrian philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein and his approach to living an ethical lifestyle, mathematics, and on how a philosopher should live. And when we are done with the clip, we are going to be having a discussion here about McCarthy's thoughts. And if you guys want more McCarthy videos, this channel features over 100 on Cormac McCarthy. I send out a weekly Cormac McCarthy newsletter. Link is down below. I have a ton of Cormac McCarthy t-shirts and a 10-hour course on the Orchard Keeper coming out on July 1st. So go check all that stuff out and let's hear from Cormac.
Wittgenstein, who we've talked about, said that one of the things he said, which is pretty outrageous, is that there's really nothing all that interesting to talk about anymore. Well, the Tractatus was published in English in 1922, and quantum mechanics was pretty much formalized by 1926. It didn't take long to do it.
Yeah.
That's only 4 years, and yet Wittgenstein doesn't seem to even be aware of this.
Right.
I mean, why is that?
Yeah.
That's baffling.
But he wasn't that interested in reality in that respect anyway.
Well, the reason he got into all this stuff was through mathematics. He was in England, and he was trying to make a career as a designing
kites, right? Yeah, he was an engineer, right, up in Manchester.
And so he was trying to design propellers, and he realized he didn't know how to do it.
Right.
And he didn't know enough math. And so he went to see Frege, and he said, who would I talk to about me? He said, well, go see Russell. So we went to see Russell, and by then he had really gotten the idea that mathematics was really interesting.
Yeah.
And Russell didn't know who he was. He wrote a letter to Lady Adeline Morel that evening, and he said, I had a young German showed up here today. I said, I don't quite know what to make of him.
Yeah.
He said, we spent most of the evening with my attempting to get him to admit that there was zero probability that there was a rhinoceros in the room, with no luck whatsoever.
Yeah. But that gets to deal to you, and I sort of feel as if it would be worth...
he's interesting. He's just... The thing that makes... The reason why everybody loves Wittgenstein is not because of his theories of languages, because they don't know what the hell he's talking about.
Right.
They love him because he lived the life of a philosopher. He inherited a huge amount of money in his mid-20s, and he gave it all away.
Yeah.
And people understand that. Said, yeah, he really is a philosopher.
Yeah.
Why did he give it away? Because he didn't think philosophers should be rich. No other reason.
Right.
But people understand that.
Yeah.
The world's all that is the case. Totality of facts, not of things. I'm a big fan of his, but I don't agree with everything.
No, I know.
Determined by the facts, and by there being all the facts, totality of facts determines what is the case. And also whatever is, okay, that's okay. The facts in logical space of the world. It's a way of putting it, and there's nothing that wrong with it, but I mean, it's, he said one time, he said, this thing's composed of these little paragraphs.
Yeah.
He said that each one of those paragraphs was a summary of a book he would never write. Is that true? No.
Right.
But it's interesting.
It's interesting. But I'm just wondering about that. The reason
Go
I'm
ahead.
curious about that is the style. I mean, we look at the completely distinct style of the Tractatus and the Investigations.
Yeah.
Do you think part of the allure of Wittgenstein is as a stylist, the way he writes?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, it's very compact.
Yeah.
Like, as you say, even if every proposition and sub-proposition and sub-sub-proposition isn't a book, it's incredibly rich.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm just wondering, how much... Were you first drawn to Wittgenstein? What drew you first? Was it the history of, the whole Bloomsbury group and his relationship to Russell? The fact that, as you point out, he's a real philosopher, he lives by his principles.
Yeah.
Was a stylist. I mean, what's the...
I don't know both. I mean, he's an attractive man. I mean...
That should be in there, man. That's part of the... Yeah,
Yeah, he's
know.
like Joyce one time. After he'd had one of his eye operations, he was dictating Finnegan's Wake, to a friend
Yeah.
in a semi-darkened room, and a friend of his knocked on the door, and he said, "Come in." Came in. They talked about other things, and the guy left. And Joyce said, "Where?" It was Frank Budgeon. He was dictating. He said, "Where were you?" He said, "The last thing you said was 'come in.'" He said, "Oh, that was when Walter knocked on the door." He said, He said, "No, leave it."
Yeah.
So somewhere it's in there.
Yeah, somewhere it's in,
Yeah.
exactly.
But no, he has a stylist. And
Yeah.
he's just in there. Plus, there's, if you compare him to Heidegger, for instance. I've read a bit of Heidegger. Nowhere in there is there anything about the moral life or whether that means anything. Or it didn't mean anything to him. He didn't consider it to be worth his attention. Whereas Wittgenstein thought of nothing else.
Yeah.
Everything that he thought about had to do with whether it was right or wrong.
Yeah.
And he worried about it constantly. And people write about him and say he was this difficult person.
But this is
Difficult.
But that's an interesting observation, right? Because again, that's part of your interest. I mean, this incredibly rigorous analytical style, dealing with very logical problems, but ultimately for Wittgenstein, an ethical concern.
Yeah,
It's very and not typical. I mean, ethicists don't write like that.
that's right.
Right, and I think, Spinoza, but that conjunction of maybe it's the right way to do it. Maybe to your earlier language unconscious point.
Well, the thing. I mean, the reason I say Wittgenstein and Heidegger is because they're generally conceived to be the two foremost philosophers of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And yet they're so very different.
Yeah.
And particularly now that Heidegger's journals have been published, you see, no, he really was a Nazi.
Yeah, he was.
It's not just
Yeah.
And he did horrible stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess ultimately you have to ask yourself the question that if philosophy is not concerned with how you should live, what in the hell is it concerned with?
So I think McCarthy here is repeating a rumor about Ludwig that because he didn't know enough math, he went to the mathematician Frege to help him out. But he had already established a deep interest in the philosophy of mathematics before that and had been reading Bertrand Russell's and Frege's work. And according to family members, he had just basically become a near dropout in terms of aeronautical engineering and was focusing exclusively on mathematics. And we actually have a report of his first meeting with Frege. And if I'm mispronouncing these names, guys, I'm sorry, but who the fuck cares? And Ludwig had this to say about his first encounter. I was shown into Frege's study, and Frege was a small, neat man with a pointed beard who bounced around the room as he taught. He absolutely wiped the floor with me, and I felt very depressed. But at the end, he said, "You must come again," so I cheered up. I had several discussions with him after that. Frege would never talk about anything but logic and mathematics. If I started on some other subject, he would say something polite and then plunge back into logic and mathematics. And another inaccuracy from McCarthy, and inaccuracies are fine. People are always coming on my YouTube channel, and like when I say something wrong, they feel like they're like slam dunking me. But when you have a ton of knowledge in your head, sometimes it comes out a little bit blurry. And the way McCarthy tells it is much better. But when Ludwig met Bertrand Russell in the first meeting, the hippopotamus thing didn't happen. Eventually, Ludwig goes and meets Bertrand, and Bertrand's like, okay, this kid has some potential. And Ludwig doesn't speak English. I mean, he speaks like almost nothing. And he starts attending Russell's lectures. But at that time, no one really liked Russell, and his lectures were very poorly attended. So eventually he started to get to know Ludwig, and he thought that he was actually an imbecile for a while, because during one of these lectures, him and Russell got into this massive argument because Ludwig was saying that all existential propositions are meaningless. And so then Russell starts, asking, are there any hippopotamuses in the room? And they start looking underneath, like the desk. He's like, look under here. Look, there's no hippopotamuses here. This is a positive statement. And Ludwig still said, no, that is incorrect. And eventually Russell became a massive fan of his and a believer. And eventually Ludwig started to criticize Russell's work and basically shot down a lot of Russell's main philosophical propositions that he had been holding up for years and made Russell restart. And, that is a huge deal. But Russell, all power to him, even though he's not like my favorite philosopher. As a human being, he was very kind because he took this in stride and said, like, I am very thankful for this guy who, like, helped me at this point in my life to restart and like rethink everything. And a lot of people can't do that. A lot of people, if someone at their job, one ups them, they like have a fucking breakdown. And Cormac is right. A lot of people don't know what the hell he is talking about. I took a class where we probably spent half a semester on Ludwig, and I had, by the end, I mean, mind you, I had a couple concussions going through me and a lot of substance flowing through me, so it would probably go a little bit better today. But I literally remember the smartest person in the class was this chick, and she's now a PhD in philosophy, a tenured professor. And near the end of the semester, she says, I don't understand what we are talking about in here. Who in here is actually doing a good job? Because we would have to write about like what we thought Ludwig was saying, like in certain passages, and re-explain it. And our professor would just give us participation points. He'd say yes. And she was like, who in here is the best student? Like, who understands what's going on? And this is one of the most funny moments of my life. I didn't know this professor knew my name. I was so zooted every single class, I barely ever said anything. And this like really smart girl viewed me as like an imbecile. And he said, Ian knows what Ludwig is talking about. And the whole class turns and looks at me, and I get the worst glares of all time. And I'm shocked too, because I'm like, bro, I have never bullshitted so hard in my life. And maybe I guess there was truth there. I wasn't going to the library. I was just reading it and just kind of replying with what I thought. But yeah, it wasn't until my adventures into studying Heidegger that I really started to understand Wittgenstein more. And I could say to this day that I resent having to study him. When I think about like going deeper into his works, I actually have like a compilation of critical essays on him that I had never read in years and just been on the list, and I just keep avoiding it for like other things. So yeah, McCarthy is right here. However, the story of him is so intriguing, and that's what McCarthy is really talking about here. We already saw him like anteing up his story, and him giving up all of his wealth, which is true, is so appalling, because most of us, if we received wealth, especially for our thoughts and being smart, or if we, I mean, maybe not for that, but if we had the ability to just think all day but still have a very nice house and all the things that we wanted, we would take that in an instant and never think twice about it. But a lot of the great philosophers, if you look at Spinoza, Kant, Nietzsche, Wittgenstein, like all these guys lived harsh lives and were just sickly and like grinding out philosophy all day. And I really like how McCarthy said that and mentioned the idea that in each one of his sentences, because if you read one of his books, they come with these sentences or like these paragraphs, could be an entire book, because the ideas are just monster. And so as such a great stylist and such a unique person, it's interesting McCarthy felt drawn to him, because in this discussion, we got very little talk about his philosophy in general, but McCarthy seems very drawn to him. David Krakauer kind of said there, you probably have all this memorized. So we can see that this is very impactful for McCarthy.